The hostess at Brasserie Cartier did not look at the woman's face when she said it. She looked at the coat. It was a beige wool coat, decades old, buttoned to the collar, the kind that had been good once and now simply was. The woman wearing it stood at the front of the restaurant with her hands folded in front of her and her chin slightly lifted. It's the way a person stands when they have spent a lifetime deciding not to shrink. She was small. Her white hair was pulled back neatly. Her shoes were flat and worn at the heels. She carried no purse, only a slim envelope clutched in one hand. "I'm sorry," the hostess said, not sounding particularly sorry at all. "We're fully booked this evening." The woman, whose name was Beatrice Holst, 79 years old, did not flinch. She had heard that particular tone before. She had been hearing it for decades. "I have a reservation," Beatrice said. "Under Holst." 7 o'clock. Host typed something with 2 fingers and then looked up with the expression of a person who has already decided the answer. "I don't see anything." "Then look again, please." There was a pause. The kind of pause that is not about finding information but about establishing who is in charge of a situation. Behind Beatrice, the restaurant hummed with the particular sound of a Friday evening crowd. Silverware on porcelain, wine being poured, conversations layered over each other in the warm amber light. Brasserie Cartier had been the best restaurant in Millhaven, Ontario for 30 years. White tablecloths. A sommelier who walked the floor like he owned it. A waiting list that stretched 3 weeks on a good month. The kind of place where people came to feel like they had arrived somewhere. Standing outside it, in a coat that had seen better decades, Beatrice simply waited. It was the man behind her who first noticed what was happening. His name was Vincent Keogh, 44 years old, a pipefitter who had driven 2 hours from Sudbury that afternoon, with his daughter strapped into the back seat of a 10-year-old Civic that needed new tires. They were celebrating. His daughter Nell had just turned 8, and for her birthday she had asked, not for a toy, not for a party with her friends, but to have dinner at a real fancy restaurant, because she had seen one in a movie once and wanted to know what it felt like. Vincent had made the reservation 6 weeks ago. He had worn the only button-down shirt he owned that didn't have paint on the collar. He was not a man who ate at places like Brasserie Cartier. He knew that the moment he walked in. He had felt it in the way the coat-check woman's eyes moved across him, and then settled on a point slightly past his shoulder, as though looking directly at him required too much effort. But he had come for Nell. And Nell, 8 years old with her hair in 2 braids and her good dress on, was standing beside him with her eyes wide at all of it, the candles, the flowers, the way the glasses caught the light. He watched the hostess tell Beatrice the reservation wasn't there. He watched Beatrice say she was certain it was. He watched the hostess's expression, and recognized it immediately, the way a man who has been on the wrong end of that expression his whole life always recognizes it. It was the look that said, "You are not the kind of person we were expecting." The hostess turned to Vincent as though Beatrice had simply ceased to exist. "Welcome to Brasserie Cartier. Do you have a reservation?" "In a minute," Vincent said. He turned to Beatrice. Up close she was smaller than he'd realized, and there was something precise and careful about her, the way she held herself, the way her hands stayed folded. She did not look confused or distressed. She looked patient in the way that people are patient when they have learned that impatience costs them more than it costs anyone else. "She just told me nothing is available," Beatrice said quietly. Not to him specifically, just to the air between them. "What's the name on the reservation?" Vincent asked. "Holst. 7 o'clock, table for 2. "Can you check again?" The hostess gave him the same measured look she had given Beatrice. "I've already checked twice. The system makes mistakes," Vincent said. "Can a manager check?" Something shifted in the hostess's jaw, a muscle, barely visible. "I can ask the floor manager if he has a moment." "That would be great," Vincent said. "We'll wait." Nell tugged at his sleeve. He looked down at her. She was watching Beatrice with an expression he recognized, the specific look his daughter had when she was trying to understand something that didn't make sense to her yet. "Dad," Nell said, in the way children say things they think are quiet but aren't. That's a good question, Vincent said. Beatrice looked down at Nell and something shifted in her face. Not pity. Not amusement. Something warmer than both. Hello, Beatrice said. Nell, are you eating here too? I'm trying to, Beatrice said. It's my birthday, Nell said. Is it? Beatrice's voice was the kind of voice that had once commanded rooms, still did, even at this volume. And how old? That's an excellent age, Beatrice said seriously. I remember it well. Nell considered this with the gravity it deserved. Did they have restaurants then? Vincent pressed his lips together. Beatrice's eyes crinkled at the corners. A few. The floor manager appeared from somewhere near the back, moving between tables with the practiced efficiencies of a man who spent his evenings managing small emergencies. His name was nothing Beatrice had caught, and it didn't matter. What mattered was the quick, involuntary survey he made of her when he arrived at the podium. Coat, shoes, envelope. Before his expression reset to something professionally neutral. I understand there's a confusion about a reservation? No confusion, Beatrice said. I have a reservation. Holst, 7 o'clock, table for 2. I made it 3 weeks ago by telephone and confirmed it last Tuesday. The manager glanced at the screen. His finger scrolled. I'm not seeing a Holst. Then the booking was entered incorrectly, Beatrice said. That is a problem with your system, not with my reservation. The manager's expression did the thing that expressions do, when a person is deciding how much trouble something is worth. He looked at Beatrice. He looked at her coat again briefly, as though it might tell him something different the second time. Unfortunately, without a confirmed booking in our system, we're not able to seat you this evening. We're fully committed. The restaurant was perhaps Beatrice third's full. He suspected. Beatrice saw it too. That table in the corner is empty, Beatrice said pleasantly. The way a person states a fact they would like acknowledged. That table is reserved for a party arriving at 7:30, the manager said. Then I'll be finished well before 7:30. Ma'am, my name, Beatrice said, is Beatrice Holst. I made a reservation at this restaurant. And you are telling me I cannot be seated, despite the fact that there are empty tables visible from where I'm standing. She paused. Not for effect. Just to let the sentence settle. I would like to understand which part of that is my problem to solve. There was a silence. Vincent realized he'd been holding his breath. The manager opened his mouth, and Vincent said, I'd like to give her my table. Everyone looked at him. He hadn't entirely planned to say it, but it had come out the way things come out when you've been watching something long enough, and a line gets crossed that you didn't even know you had. We have a reservation, he said to the manager. 7 o'clock, Kiof. Table for 2. He looked at Beatrice. You take it. Beatrice looked at him for a long moment. That's your table, or we'll come back another time. He glanced at Nell. Right? Nell looked at the restaurant. She looked at Beatrice. She looked at her father. She was 8 years old, and she understood more than adults ever gave her credit for. Yeah, she said. That's okay. The manager cleared his throat. We may be able to accommodate the child, and she's not the child, Vincent said. She's my daughter, and I'm asking you to seat this woman at the table I reserved. He kept his voice even. He had learned in 44 years of being the kind of person that rooms like this were not built for, that the moment you raised your voice you lost. Unless there's a reason you can't do that. The silence that followed was the kind that makes a room shift slightly, the way a building shifts in wind. A couple at the nearest table had stopped pretending not to listen. A waiter slowed his walk. The manager looked at Vincent. He looked at Beatrice. He picked up 2 menus. Right this way, ma'am. Beatrice did not look triumphant. She did not look relieved. She simply inclined her head slightly and followed. Before she went, she turned back to Vincent and Nell. Would you join me? She said. I reserved a table for 2, but I imagine they can find a 3rd chair. Vincent started to say no, the automatic reflex of a man who has spent his life not wanting to impose, and then he caught Nell looking at him with an expression that could only be described as do not say no to this. Sure, he said. Thank you. They were seated at a table near the window. Snow had begun falling outside, fine and thin, drifting sideways across the glow of the street lamps. Nell pressed her nose briefly against the glass before remembering where she was and sitting up straight. The sommelier came. He spoke to the table over Beatrice's shoulder, directing his suggestions at Vincent, who did not correct him, simply let him finish. Then Beatrice ordered the wine. She did it without opening the list. She named the vineyard, the year, and then said something in French that the sommelier had not expected. And for a half-second his professional composure slipped entirely. He recovered, nodded, and left, walking slightly faster than he had arrived. Nell watched this with great interest. "How did you do that?" "I used to visit that vineyard," Beatrice said. "A long time ago. With your family?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "With my husband. Before he passed." Nell nodded with the careful seriousness she applied to things she didn't fully understand but knew mattered. "My mom's gone too," she said. "She left when I was little." Beatrice looked at her, then at Vincent. Vincent kept his eyes on the breadbasket that had appeared in front of them. There wasn't much to add to what Nell had said. It was accurate. He had been doing this. All of it. The braids in the morning, the school pickups, the birthday dinners at restaurants he couldn't afford and couldn't quite figure out how to belong in. By himself for 6 years now. It wasn't something he talked about. It was just the shape of his life. "Your father brought you here tonight?" Beatrice said to Nell. "Not a question. It was the only thing I asked for," Nell said. "For my birthday. I've never been anywhere like this." Beatrice looked at the room. The white tablecloths, the candles, the sommelier returning now with the wine, as though she were for the first time as well. "Neither had I," she said, "when I was 8. The dinner that followed was not something Vincent would easily describe afterward. It wasn't the food, though the food was remarkable. It was the way the evening arranged itself into something none of them had expected. Beatrice asked Nell about school, and listened with genuine attention, not the performed attention of adults who are waiting for children to finish talking. She asked Vincent about his work, and when he told her he was a pipe fitter, she asked specific questions. About projects, about the trade, about what it took to build something that held. She had opinions about infrastructure that surprised him. She had opinions about most things. He found himself talking more than he had in months. At one point, the manager came to the table. He said something about ensuring the evening was satisfactory. His manner now warm in a way it had not been 45 minutes earlier. Vincent watched Beatrice receive this without acknowledgement of the change, without graciousness, and without coldness, simply with the steady evenness of a person who had stopped tracking how the room oriented itself around her. "It's fine," she said, and turned back to Nell, who was in the middle of a story about her teacher's hat. The dessert came. Nell got a small cake with a candle already in it. Vincent had thought to call ahead. And when it arrived, the waiter sang in French, which made Nell's entire face go still, with the weight of so much being exactly right. She blew out the candle. She didn't say what she wished for. She looked at her father, and then at the snow outside, and she seemed entirely satisfied with the world. It was after 9 when they finally stood to leave. At the door, Vincent helped Nell with her coat and then turned to Beatrice, who was already buttoning hers. The hostess was occupied with another couple. The manager was across the room. "I'm glad you stayed," Beatrice said. "Thank you for the invitation," Vincent said. She looked at him for a moment in the way people look at each other, when a thing has been said that doesn't quite cover what happened, but is the nearest available word. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She waited. "When they told you there was no reservation," he said, "you weren't surprised. You looked like you'd been there before." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "People see what they expect to see," she said finally. "And when you're old, and a woman, and not dressed the way they think you ought to be dressed," she paused, "they expect to see someone who doesn't belong." She looked at the room. "I've found it's not always worth the energy of correcting them." "Tonight you did," he said. "Tonight," she said. "Someone was watching." She looked at Nell, who had gone to look at the snow through the glass of the door. "Children notice everything," Beatrice said. "And they remember." She took a card from the envelope she'd been carrying all evening and held it out. He took it without reading it. "I own a construction supply company," she said, in the same tone she had used to order wine. "We're expanding our infrastructure division next quarter. I don't know what your situation is in Sudbury, but if you're interested in a conversation, call the number on the back." He looked at the card then. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, embossed. The name on it was Beatrice Holst. Below that, in small clean letters, Holst Industrial Group. And below that, an address in downtown Toronto, and a direct line. He knew the name. Anyone in the trades knew that name. Holst Industrial had built half the water treatment systems in northern Ontario. They were the reason 3 towns in the Shield had clean water and roads that didn't buckle in spring. He looked up. She was already turning toward the door. "Have a good evening, Mr. Keogh," she said. "And happy birthday to your daughter." Outside, Nell was waiting on the sidewalk, her face tipped up to catch snowflakes. When Vincent came out, she looked at him. "She was nice," Nell said. "Yeah," he said. "She was." "Do you think we'll see her again?" He looked at the card in his hand. The snow was coming down properly now, settling on the parked cars, on the awning of the restaurant, on the shoulders of his coat. He thought about the evening. The way the manager's face had changed. The way the sommelier had been caught off guard by a woman in a wool coat who knew more about French wine than he did. The way Beatrice had ordered a birthday cake, as though it were simply obvious, without being asked. He thought about the fact that she had been standing at that door for almost 10 minutes before anyone did anything, and that the thing that had finally moved the room was not her reservation or her argument or her patient, dignified refusal to leave, but a pipe fitter from Sudbury, in a shirt with no paint on the collar, handing over a table he couldn't really afford. "Maybe," he said to Nell. He put the card in his breast pocket against his chest. Nell took his hand. They walked through the snow toward the parking garage, their footprints the only ones on that stretch of sidewalk, side by side, the same size for just a few more years. He didn't call the number that night, or the next morning. He thought about it. He turned the card over in his hands more than once. He was not a man who was easily impressed by names or addresses, but he was a man who paid attention to people, and Beatrice Holst was. Whatever else she was, however many buildings her name was on, someone who had stood at a restaurant door and waited, quietly, to be seen as a person, not a billionaire. Not a legend of the Northern Ontario trades. Just a woman with a reservation. He called on the Monday. Her assistant answered on the second ring and put him through within a minute, which told him more than most conversations do. "Mr. Keogh," Beatrice said. "I thought about it," he said. "Good," she said. "I was hoping you would." The conversation lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, he had a meeting scheduled in Toronto for the following month, and a list of 3 projects she thought he should know about before they spoke again. He did not get the sense that she offered this to everyone. He did not get the sense that it was charity. He had been in the trades long enough to know the difference between a handout and an opportunity, and this was very clearly the second thing. What had opened the door was not luck, not connections, not the card or the card's address or what it said about the woman who carried it. What had opened the door was a table he had given up without thinking about whether he'd get anything back. He thought about that on the drive back to Sudbury. Nell asleep in the back seat, the highway dark and straight and edged in snow. He thought about the hostess's face when she looked at Beatrice's coat. He thought about the manager's practiced blankness. He thought about how close Beatrice had been to simply turning around, going home, calling it an evening, letting the room win. And he thought about Nell, 8 years old, watching all of it with those clear, patient eyes. She had not said, on the drive home, anything about the restaurant being fancy, or the candle in the cake. She had fallen asleep quickly, the way children do, when a day has been entirely used up. But in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with her cereal, she had said, "That lady couldn't get in because of her coat, right?" He had looked at her over his coffee. "Something like that," he said. Nell had thought about this for a moment, chewing slowly. "That's dumb," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She went back to her cereal. He went back to his coffee. Outside the window, the snow from the weekend was still on the ground, bright and even in the morning light. He thought, she'll remember this, not the restaurant, not the cake or the French waiter or the snow. She'll remember what her father did and what it cost him, and what he didn't say about it afterward. He thought, that's the whole job, really. The rest is just showing up. He drank his coffee and looked at his daughter, and thought about the card in his coat pocket, and about the meeting in Toronto, and about a woman in a beige wool coat who had stood at a door in the snow and waited, with absolute patience and absolute certainty, for the world to see her clearly. The richest person in the room, it turned out, was the one who already knew her own worth, and did not need the room to confirm it.